I've got to remember what's on the PowerPoint. Kia ora koutou everybody, nau mai haere mai, thanks for coming. Lucky that you could all find a seat, and a seat, mind you, where the sun is not in your eyes. So what we're going to do is just whip through quite quickly the origins of this new curriculum, Tō Tātou Whakapono. So it's going to be quite quick, but the document itself is online, so you just need to go to www.ourfaith.nz, and some of the resources are there already in the curriculum document, and I know you've got a hard copy in your hand. So look, I thought one of the best places to contextualise it would be to think about what kids are saying that are in Catholic schools at the moment. So what I do every year is I connect with all the secondary schools and ask them if they want to enter into an inter-school Catholic yarn. We call it an ICY. And it's me and about 5 or 6 kids from 2 different schools just talking about it. And it nearly always starts off like it's a Bishop Shield competition. So the very first thing I say to them, just tell me about your school. And they go, well, our school's a Catholic school, and that means that religious education is the most important subject that we do. And I go, stop. It's nearly always the same. And I say, look, that is probably very true. I'm sure that is exactly what it's like. But I just want to know what you think. And then they turn into 16-year-olds, because it's year 12, 16, 17-year-olds, and they actually tell you what's on their mind. So here's some examples. Right, one student said that the culture, that Catholic culture makes it easier to talk about the belief stuff. In other words, there's a place that's not always necessarily safe, but it's certainly appropriate that faith stuff can get talked about. And often in a lot of classes it is safe for them to do. And another one said that RE's not just about faith, but it's about your place in the world. And I asked them, I said, well, what do you mean? And this was a Pacifica student, and he says, well, it's not just sort of what you know or what you're doing, it's sort of where your heart is. And he said it better than I've said it, but this was the actual phrase that he used. It's really good for learning things if you come from a strict Catholic home. It fills in gaps in information which parents don't have. It's not just doing things because you have to. Now, that really sort of rocked me, and this was a young Filipino woman, and she was saying that her parents have a beautiful faith, and it's one that she really connects with, but there's a lot of questions that they can't answer, and they say, well, I don't know, and it's not that it's not necessarily important, it's just that in a Catholic school they get a chance to learn these things. This one rocked my world. I said, what do you mean that there's a difference between staying a Catholic and being a Catholic? And this was a Pākehā boy, and he goes, well, I think a lot of older people have just stayed Catholic. I don't think they know what it means to be Catholic. Now there's a challenge. Am I someone who has stayed Catholic, or am I somebody who actually knows what it is to be Catholic? We haven't got time to climb into it, I'd love to, but this is sort of linked to this one of knowledge. It was my family's faith when I was younger, and now it's mine. Information is powerful. That they're right. And by the way, these groups are quite so I have probably about 14 conversations, so about 28 schools. And the DRSs, Directors of Religious Studies, pick their kids differently. So some of them, got to get some kids for Mr. McLeod, who's keen? Right, you're in. Okay, and others go for their sort of possible prefects, their cream of the crop. And the beauty of it is that you end up with this lovely reality of what's going on in Catholic schools. And often you get kids that sort of stand up very hand on heart. Well, I'm an atheist, and I go, great, I'd really like to know what you're thinking. Somebody who came from a state school felt that the values never connected really at the state school, but they connect in a Catholic school. They could see how they fit. This was an atheist kid. He said lots of people think that RE doesn't matter. It won't make much difference to your career, but it makes a difference to your life. And he was really thinking we're in the middle of their school was in the middle of a social justice unit. And he was thinking of all of these things that were connecting to the type of world that he wanted to live in. This sort of is another link to that one, that they could ask their teachers things when they couldn't ask their family. There's other quotes around, I'm not sure if I include it in this, where the need for teachers to have a really good knowledge of the subject is critical as well, and that's something we're also trying to grow in the New Zealand context. one girl, and this girl was at a girls' school, and she said that being Catholic became a really significant part of her life, and she got baptised not long after this, and that this taking her out of a negative place was something that drew her into the faith. You know, there was this link, and I was quite anti baptisms not taking place in parish, and I still think the best place for the sacraments to take place are in parish. But she described how the school does it at assemblies, the whole assembly, everyone is there, and they sort of cover it with cloths and things. There's like a paddling pool that they stand in, and the water is just poured over their heads as part of this baptism. And she said she could remember when a senior girl had this done when she was quite little, and she'd thought about it for about 3 or 4 years, and then she decided that was something she really wanted to do. Interesting how the Holy Spirit shakes things up, you know. I love this. Some days I just sort of flip-flop around, and I laughed out loud because I said, that's me. I'm like, you know, some days it's something that resonates more with me than in other days. This one also sort of really surprised me, that our kids are so busy, there's so much going on in their lives, that with our RE, this young guy said, well, I don't know if I'd actually have time for it if it didn't happen in RE. So all of this sort of paints a context where religious education sort of fits into the lives of the kids that we're doing, and we often need to sneak up on them. So Catholic schools once, arguably, were filled with people of faith, and the kids came from very strong Catholic families with quite strong faith of their own that needed to be sort of nurtured and grown along. Now, Catholic schools are really significant places of evangelisation. Not evangelisation in terms of Bible Belt stuff, but this continual invitation for them to engage and to learn and to have a sense that this is what the church believes. That actually has a resonance with my life. That's something that I want to believe too. So the new curriculum, this is sort of foundational, if you like, for all the things that are part of the curriculum. So as you saw when Jared was talking last week, 4 themes. Really around the area of God, good news, our story being church. And what I'm going to do is unpack those, and what's going to happen in the next sessions for the 2020 is that we're going to unpack grace, holiness, justice, wisdom and prayer. So I'm going to focus on the themes and where they came from and what they sort of mean for us in the curriculum. Any sort of questions, Sophie? Anything that sort of leaps out at you? No? Good. There we go, in 5 minutes. Good, okay. So, in the curriculum document itself, these are things that are pulled out. We actually acknowledge the fact that teaching RE is hard but sacred work. It's not easy teaching religious education, but I don't think it should be. Teachers have to be on their toes, they have to know their stuff, and our kids, we need to. The metaphor I always give is that our kids should be like this, having to work for their balance, and our job is to constantly be prodding them so that they've got to, because kids come in like this, either as Catholics, right, immovable, or as people that say faith has nothing to do with their life, immovable. And our job is just to nudge them into so that they're working to hold their stance. It's a body of knowledge. So religious education isn't primarily about catechesis. It's not primarily about faith formation, though it forms a platform for faith formation. It's about learning. So, and what that means is that any child that comes into a Catholic school is expected to learn the stuff that's taught. Because we're not saying that in terms of their heart and mind, they are expected to take on the faith. We say pretty regularly that we hope that it's something that resonates with their lives. But in actual fact, they have a right to say, well, this isn't something that's part of my life at this moment. But my goodness, when they leave a Catholic school, they're going to have a whole lot of solid knowledge, not just stuff they've seen on movies or from the social media or something like that has said, okay, this is what Catholics believe. They're going to have more wisdom than that. So skills and values are part of that. There's a language of it. We talk about things like sacraments, and we talk about things like tabernacles and Eucharist, and there's so much language that's involved. We sort of equip them with that too. A foundation for faith, as I mentioned, everyone is welcome in RE, so no one is being brainwashed. I used to start every single year 12 and 13 class. That's mostly where I taught when I was teaching at Kavanagh, now Trinity College. And I used to say there is two things that I cannot stand and where students and I are going to have a problem in this class. One is the raving, non-thinking atheist. Got no time for them. And the other is the raving, non-thinking Catholic. I've got no time for you either. You've got to engage your brains in this class, right? So, and then you sort of, often you get this dialogue, and I used to love it when kids, despite themselves, would start to sort of, join in, and they'd sort of throw out this comment, and you could take it places. Araha, whanangatanga, manakitanga are critical to what goes on in RE. It supports the hikoi wairua. This is a term that we are using and equipping kids with for their spiritual journey. You are on a hikoi wairua, and your hikoi wairua has taken you to this place, to this moment in this day, but it's never finished, and it won't be finished until we meet with God, ultimately. And it's cool for our kids to have a sense that that they are journeying this, that they are moving along. And finally, it's about relationship with God, relationship with one another, relationship with others and with our world, and relationship with self, rather, in our world. So if we look at the themes, those 4 themes that I talked about, this is what's on. So this is on page 42. You don't need to go looking for it, but in that curriculum document, this is the image that we got. And so we chose quite a traditional image of the Celtic sort of trefoil. And obviously it's about Father, Son, Spirit. So when you look at what the kids are actually learning, the heading is God is. So 5-year-olds and 6-year-olds are just in a sandpit, if you like, where they're playing around with this idea that God is. And we know that lots of our kids, let alone coming and not knowing the sign of the cross, they often arrive in a Catholic school and they've never really heard about God. Family hasn't talked about it or anything. It's brand new. Well, it's a great place to begin. I mean, it's wonderful, those Catholic kids that arrive and know all of the stuff and bring it on. But we play around with, and originally you sort of had to go to God and go straight to Trinity. Well, Trinity's a huge concept to try, and 3 gods in one, 3 persons in one God, is a really complex thing for kids to get a handle on. And to actually start by just introducing them to Jesus and to the Holy Spirit and to God the Father. And of course, elements of Trinity come into it. We're not teaching them about Trinity until the next year. Right? And then when we do it, we talk about the Trinity in relationship, so that relationship of Trinity is the relationship that flows out into our relationships. So when our relationships of araha, or tika, pono, araha, that elements of justice and truth, that they flow from God's relationship. That's where we get the capacity to do it. Then we move into people of God. This is not to say that we haven't talked about the church beforehand, but as we flow through the Te Atua theme, we end up in this place where we are the people of God. And we can actually talk about what that means and what that looks like. And then we're doing a lot in the curriculum where we're playing with this quite difficult thing in schools where, we've got about a third of our schools are years 1 to 6. And then the next third is sort of years 7 to 13, and then the next third is years 9 to 13. Now those schools all have kids coming in at completely different times. How do we hook them into the curriculum when they're coming in? So you think of this, if you're as a year 7 student, and we've gone all around this and we come into the presence of God. That's the primary bit. And then when we move on to secondary, images of God, what does God look like? Because often the God that children don't believe in is actually the image of God that they've created that they don't believe in. And they need to know that these images get deconstructed. Our images are not God. And so anyone that sort of says, okay, God is exactly this, the only thing, if I've done that I know, is that I'm wrong. I've locked out a whole lot of what God is. So whether God is big, whether God is small, whether God is close, whether God is loving, whether God is judging, all of these are elements of God that we need to sort of be able to come to learn to recognise. Beliefs and believing, what is belief? God's promise, that God makes a promise to us that we are God's people and that God wants to fulfil that, and that Jesus is real and radical. One of the topics that sort of dropped off in secondary school once senior assessments came in was the Jesus unit at the end, which we used to finish with. So only 9 schools in the country were doing that. In the new curriculum, we're bringing it back with a vengeance to sort of look at that radicalness of Jesus. In Scripture, this just quickly, so we're looking at Old Testament and New Testament. We're using the phrases Old Testament rather than Hebrew Scriptures and Christian Scriptures. Old Testament because it is the older Testament. It was the one that was there first. That's the emphasis we give to the kids. So we start with stories about Jesus. We move on to the stories and messages of Jesus. So quite succinctly, so our 5 and 6 year olds, even though they are learning a bit about what Jesus says, because you can't help but do that in a Catholic school, the focus in RE is on what are these stories about Jesus, learning who Jesus was. And then in the next 2 years, they learn what the messages of Jesus were. So parables, we break them. We're doing some real decent exegesis pitched at their level. You know, they're learning that a talent was about $1 million, for example. You know, we think of a talent as being sort of bigger than a denarius. It was about $1 million in today's. It was huge. If someone was given 10 talents, the Jewish mind, and someone else was given 5 and someone else was given 1, the Jewish listeners would have known that that person with the 10 talents would have needed a caravan of camels to carry it, or oxen or donkeys or whatever it was, right? And we sort of get a sense of quite a significant bag and a slightly smaller bag, and then, you know, just a couple of coins. Well, you know, let's equip our kids with that sort of reality. And this was Laurel Lanner, who I work with, genius. Let's talk about the Old Testament as the stories that Jesus grew up with. So rather than something that is utterly other, let's draw it in so that Jesus would have known these stories and he would have shared them. And of course he taps into them, and we know from the Gospel writers that happens. And then finally, we come again to exploring the Bible. We're going to tell about how difficult it was to get the Bible into language. We haven't written any of these last 2 years in terms of resources. But, you know, people died. Catholics were burning people at the stake for trying to put the Bible into their own vernacular. Well, let's tell that story. Let them know that, because the church also recognised at a later point that this must be something that's accessed, and the fact that people wanted this in their language so much. Now we talk about covenant and freedom, the gospel's call to confront, and the message and mission of Paul. See, Catholics don't do Paul well. He's been pretty much non-existent in sort of Catholic education, really, because Protestants really climbed into Paul. Protestants do a whole lot on who Paul was and what Paul said, and the church must be like how Paul sort of pitched it. We have it to a certain degree, of course, in our church understandings, but we haven't taught kids about what's in those epistles. What's in the epistles? What people have actually, what they can take from this sort of a genius of who Paul was. And then the last lot, we start with kids, whānau and people at the centre. So you think of 5-year-olds, it's all about me. And that flows into our school, our parish, our country, our church. I'll just move on. So we start with I am, because that's where every 5-year-old begins. It's all about me. We got in trouble, rightly so, when we were putting it together, because the Māori people that we were working with to actually put this together said, well, hang on, you can't just have a child by themselves at the centre. That's not how Māori understanding works. It's always with family, and it's true, it must be. So we linked the I am, flowed through to that includes whānau, and then we very quickly move on to my whānau and Jesus' whānau as well. Knowing that this is a really complex area, right? Because a lot of families are really broken. And so what teachers have the skills to do, and in the background notes that we're writing for the resources, says to look, tread really carefully here. Celebrate what's good in any kid's family, and it might not necessarily be their immediate parents, but they will have people with whom they engage who are whānau to them that sort of model what Jesus is up to in their lives. Then we move to our school, our place. That's where we do charisms and together in our world. Persecution, power. Aotearoa New Zealand's a huge lot at year 11 on what's happening in the New Zealand church, our history. Like, we're going to teach kids, because they've never learned it, that Irish were told not to apply for jobs, certain parts of New Zealand, because they were Catholic, and at the same time because they were Irish. Little bits of text and stuff that sort of talk about that sort of level of oppression against Catholics as well as talking about elements of, you know, colonialism, but also Māori and others sort of picking up this message of Jesus, and then engaging and responding. So that's what the themes look like. Being church, just the last thing I'll say on this is the Māori terms pick up these elements of what it is to be church in a beautiful way. They add a nuance to it. Discipleship and mission, te kawa o hihu, the way of Jesus. Morality and ethics, whaia te tika, seeking. So it's not just about justice being something that sits outside, but this action to actually bring it in. And no ngā tupuna, Christian hope, being linked to our ancestors. It's the hope that our ancestors picked up that we're wanting to share with our young people as well. And sacramental living, we're trying to say sacraments aren't just moments in time. They are also something that flow through us. We should be connecting with the sacraments that we've received, bringing them to mind regularly in our lives. This is a moment of reconciliation. This is a moment of confirmation where I feel the Spirit at work in my life. This is a moment of receiving the Eucharist that actually nourishes me in this time that's quite difficult because I've gathered around the table. I can recognise there's a strength that comes from that. And the Māori term is kia inoi, to pray, and kia mahi, to work. So the prayer and the work that comes together in our lives. Araha mai, araha atu, love in, love out, Catholic social teaching. And finally, faith and culture, ko wai tātou, who are we? What does our Catholic culture look like? So kids are going to learn a lot. I belong, my spiritual journey, living like Jesus, people of hope. A whole life talking about what holiness actually looks like in the way that we live. And then being human, just love, having faith in our world. 4 big ideas, themes, and through every single one of these themes is woven the 5 cross themes, which are going to be picked up in the subsequent sessions. So, any thoughts, anything that leaps out or any questions? Don't everybody speak at once.